Why, yes, I am friendly. Welcome to the channel. My name's Chris George, and we are counting down the top board game geek mechanics of all time and ranking them. We're defining them and ranking them. Because what's better than just definitions? Ranking them. I don't know if I'm quoting something there. I'm quoting me. I'm quoting past Chris. Or I'm quoting something else. But I just think it sounds funny. And today we are going through numbers 80 to 71. I figured I'll just do 10 because I talk a lot about them and it makes them into more manageable chunks so that I'm not throwing hour-long videos at you all the time because YouTube hates this series enough. Or maybe it's just the regular audience. But it doesn't matter, I'm enjoying it. Hopefully you've been enjoying it as well. Let's get right into the mechanics. You know the standard deal. There are 150 different mechanics that I ranked on Board Game Geek. There's around 180 total. But they're sometimes broken down based upon their own individual variations of a similar mechanic, so I kind of eliminated those. And we have made our way to the middle of the list. And I like this series a lot because not only does it help me understand different mechanics and the different terminology that is used and the different building blocks, honestly, that we can use to create things, it helps me also be a little bit more discerning about what I personally enjoy about games and can be more on the lookout for ones that I will continue to enjoy. Or looking for new ways of combining different mechanics and creating original material. So let's go right away into number 80. This is the 80th best mechanic of all time, and that is the hidden victory points mechanic. And this is a pretty simple one to explain. Most games, a lot of games involve victory points, and these ones are secret. All can be hidden, some can be hidden. The game that immediately jumps to mind for this for me is Puerto Rico, because whenever you're shipping goods off to wherever they get points, you're getting these point tokens and they are placed face down. Anytime the points are gained by a player and then placed face down so that people lose track of them, this falls into the hidden victory point element. And I like this aspect of a game too. It keeps it focused on the moment. You don't necessarily know 100% who is winning or who isn't, but you can get a general sense of what is happening on the board, but you can't math it out, so you can perfectly target that person. Or if you are mathing it out, you have to keep that information in your head, and it just adds one more element to keep track of. And I like all of that. Where I don't like hidden victory points, where they really almost detract from a game for me, is when it's all hidden. When all of the points are hidden and you have no concept as to who's in the lead or who isn't. And this is my main gripe with the game Concordia. And Concordia is actually listed as the #1 ranked game that includes hidden victory points on Board Game Geek. Now, what I found in going through this list is that often games that include this sort of thing are missed. They're not labeled as such on Board Game Geek. Sometimes the publishers just mislabel things, or whoever is adding the Board Game Geek listing mislabels it. I have no idea why Jaipur is listed under this hidden victory point mechanic section right now, because the points aren't hidden. You can look through the stack. When you're getting the goods, they're in a predetermined amount and they stay face up. The only thing that is hidden in Jaipur is when you sell 3 or 4 or 5 of a good, you get an additional bonus token, and that is a hidden point that your opponent doesn't know about. And then it's revealed at the end, and you potentially have more. That's what it is. That's why Jaipur is listed as the hidden victory point. See, they're not always mislabeled. Sometimes you're just an idiot like me. But circling back to Concordia, when everything is completely hidden, and then it's all revealed at the end, that personally doesn't make me enjoy the game more. I don't like seeing the mystery all be revealed at the end, especially over a longer game. Concordia plays, I don't know, I think it took me like an hour and a half, 2 hours to play when I played it. I've only played it the once. And it was that sort of reveal of points at the end that made me feel a little aimless as I was wandering through the game, especially as a first-time player. If you don't know what gets you points, and you don't have the feedback right away as to, oh, okay, my opponent did this thing, and that really shot them up on the track. That's good to know. Maybe I'll try to incorporate that into my strategy. I feel like it really punishes new players, in a sense, if you're unable to grasp how the points are going to turn out at the end, and makes it a little bit harder to learn and a little less enjoyable for me personally. So that's why hidden victory points ended up going down here. I like it as a mechanic that's incorporated with other things, but as the central mechanic, like I think it's great in Jaipur, you're drawing these random ones you don't know. You have to judge within a range of probability what it might be. But when it is the central mechanic, or it is not incorporated or is fully fledged, then I'm not really that interested. Anyway, that's enough on hidden victory points. See, this is why there are only 10 now. Moving along to number 79, the 79th best mechanic in the world, and that is push your luck. And honestly, this is just gambling. The definition is you have to decide whether you keep the things that you've earned or if you try to get a little bit more, but you have to risk some of the stuff that you've already earned. Can't Stop is a classic example of push your luck. You're continuing to roll the dice and you're moving up pegs, but if you roll the dice and you can't move a peg up, you go back to where you started. And pushing your luck is always going to be fun. Well, in a, not a gambling sense, but I do enjoy push your luck games. I enjoy what happens if I just draw one more quack of Quedlinburg out of the bag. Am I going to explode or am I not? Can I just get to the top of Can't Stop by just rolling the dice over and over and not stopping? That's usually how I end up playing Can't Stop. And I think it makes it fun for me. I don't know if it makes it fun for the people who I play with. But that idea, that concept of risk versus reward adds a level of stakes to a board game, which is exciting. The reason why, again, it's on the lower half of mechanics for me is that oftentimes it deals with, or it's more skewed towards luck, right? It's in the title, push your luck. See how lucky you get. And while I appreciate that in some games, it's not something that I always want in my own games personally. I like to have a level of control over my choices and strategy. And, if you get a bad draw and lose the game, or you get a good draw and win the game, it makes it a little less impactful to me. Although I will say one of my favorite push your luck games I have been playing recently called Thebes, where you are archaeologists and you're pulling hopefully relics out of a bag and not dirt, as everyone chants dirt, dirt, dirt at you around the table, hoping that you draw dirt. That's a really interesting push your luck game because you can spend a lot of time researching and giving yourself more pulls down the line and more chances to draw the things that you want. Or you can just say, no, I'm not going to spend that much time researching, I'm just going for it and hoping that you get lucky too. So there's some fun elements that can be had. It can create a fun sense around the table, but for someone like me who's more interested in really strategic games, that's why it's lower on the list. Now, number 78 is map reduction. And this is a fun one. I like coming across, and we'll probably come across these a little less frequently as the list progresses, but ones that I don't really consider. But this is where it starts out as a big map, and it actually gets reduced. Some maps expand as you go on, and the playing area becomes bigger. Some maps reduce, and the playing area becomes smaller. Blood Rage is the number one ranked for map reduction because as the game progresses, Ragnarok happens, and you have less real estate to deal with. Survive Escape from Atlantis is actually probably one of my favorite implementations of this mechanic because you start on an island, and it crumbles underneath you, and you have to get to the outskirts before the volcano erupts and kills everyone. It's just a light little family game. But there's a real nice sense of fun that happens with this shrinking space. And the strategic implications are interesting as well. The downsides with this mechanic is that it can then result, in some cases, in a stalemate, because there is less map to have the thing happen, and if you have a predefined endpoint, if you have a sudden death ending, so to speak, and map reduction, then there is the chance for a stalemate. So maybe it's just that combination of a sudden death ending and map reduction, but usually when the map is being reduced, well, not usually, I'm thinking of like Santorini or any abstract game where the goal is usually predefined or predetermined. Yeah, so those would be the pitfalls for map reduction for me, but I think it's kind of cool, and anyway, it fell at number 78. Now, kind of similar, number 77 is King of the Hill. If the map is being reduced, King of the Hill is just taking that middle spot, or a spot that is desirable to all players, and trying to hold it as long as possible. This is what King of Tokyo is basically based on. This is so named because of the children's game where you would stand on a hill and your friends would tackle you and push you into the snow and make you cry and go home to your mother. But what's kind of neat about King of the Hill is that I can't think of too many games other than King of Tokyo where it is the central mechanic of the game. It's usually just an aspect of an area control game. So you'll see it in Twilight Imperium, you'll see it in Scythe, you'll see it in Inish. All of these games where there is a spot that owning it gives you a benefit, but it is not required to win the game. And in fact, it sometimes operates as a subterfuge, a focus point for everyone else to look at while you do the actual win conditions off in the corner. And it just is shy of getting into the top half of my favorite mechanics. I think because if it is the central mechanic, it's not something I'm really interested in. I like it being an element of a game, but it is just a building block to me and not something where I want to invest the entire game having it being based around. Now, also speaking of themes, number 76 is the time track. Using time as a resource. So games like Thebes, games like Patchwork, games like Tokaido or Parks, this is an example of the time track implementation, and it's that actions usually cost you a predetermined amount of time. And so that is your resource. That is everybody's resource. They have that amount of time to complete their game, and that's it. But things take this varied amount of time. So in Patchwork, you're deciding, okay, should I take this piece of quilt? It's going to cost me 10 time, even though it only costs me 1 button. And so you have to weigh both the decisions of the resources and the decision of the time that it takes and the positioning and what it allows your opponent to do in the meantime. If you shoot ahead and your opponent can do a number of very small time turns and really be not hindered whatsoever in taking those turns one after another, it provides them with a really big advantage. So juggling this is a fun thing to me. I like it especially as a resource, and that everybody has the same amount of that resource and how you use it over the course of the game. I dislike it in terms of sometimes I think it makes the decisions a little bit predictable. And that's fine because you want a kind of a tennis match back and forth of what is your opponent going to do, what are you going to do, and setting yourself up. And that can be an interesting decision space, but for me, I don't necessarily like the predictability that happens all the time with the time track, so that stops it from getting further up. I mean, I'll probably give pros and cons to each mechanic as we keep moving on. This is just where it happened to fall. I haven't changed this list whatsoever, and sometimes I think I disagree and then realize this list is infallible and hand management is the 127th mechanic of all time. Now, moving along to number 75, we've reached the midpoint. These are the top half of the best mechanics, although they still aren't the top 50, so they're still garbage. And number 75 is resource to move. And it is, as it sounds, in order to actually move your piece, you must pay something to do that. In a lot of games, you can move your piece freely. In other games, you actually have to pay a cost to move your piece, depending on how long you want to move them, where you want them to go, that sort of thing. So if you think of this as fuel, if you have a car and you need fuel to move, that's probably the best way of looking at it. And this is really interesting that these two fell side by side, the time track and the resource to move, because in essence, the time is a resource that you are expending, but it's just a different way of thinking about it. Whereas in resource to move, and I think why I like it a little bit better, you can gather up all the resources that you need and then really go on a spree. Whereas time is an ever-present thing that reminds me of my own mortality. So of course I have to put it a little bit less than just holding on to all of my greedy gains and spending it all at once. On one single Kickstarter. Too Many Bones has this. So the ones that are listed as the top of this category, we have Lost Ruins of Arnak, which I haven't yet played. Too Many Bones is also listed, which gave me pause in a similar way to Jaipur, but when you think about it, you're rolling dice and you have a movement stat, right? So even having that sort of movement stat that allows you to move a certain number of spaces, I think they've categorized it like this because you are getting, you know, your strength stat and your movement, you're getting that movement every turn in a mechanical sort of way. And so then you are expending those points to move forward. I'm not quite sure about that one though, if it should be classified as resource to move or it should be classified as something different, maybe like action points or movement points. I think specifically just movement points, if that is a mechanic. And it was number 110, I just checked. So yeah, I'm not, even though I have Too Many Bones right here, Too Many Bones Undertow, I've only played the base game once and I haven't yet dived into, no pun intended, Undertow. Maybe there's an additional resource to move element in that, but I feel like that's misclassified. Actually, a game that my neighbor designed, who's been picked up by a publisher that I can't talk about, but I'm excited to, like in 2 years, when it's finally on Kickstarter, to be like, yes, I've seen this game grow and I'm excited to talk about it. That one involves using fuel and collecting fuel to actually move from like a planet to another planet. So that's kind of what I think of when I think of the resource to move now. Even burn cycle is listed as this, and I suppose burn cycle is a little bit different because you're going to choose the amount of dice that you use on your movement turn. You could say, yes, I'm moving, and I'm going to roll 3 dice, and so then you roll the dice and you get a number of points and move. But even still, that feels like it's misclassified. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your favorite resource to move games are. Some other ones listed are Voyage of Marco Polo, Fury of Dracula, Carnegie, Lewis and Clark, Marco Polo 2. Those are what are listed at least on Board Game Geek, although I'm sure this is one that a lot of people wouldn't include because they would fear it would be fiddly. And speaking of rolling dice, number 74 is Stat Check Resolution. And this is what D&D is based upon. There's going to be a certain number that you have to hit. You're going to likely roll some dice or sometimes flip over a card and see if your number exceeds or equals the number that you have to hit. Too Many Bones definitely has this. Too Many Bones, any sort of dungeon crawler will have this. Zombicide would have this. You have to roll some dice and see if it meets the stat of your weapon in order to hit with that weapon. And this made its way in the top half because it speaks to my personal fondness for these role-playing games. This is the perfect culmination of all of those dice rolling mechanics that we have been talking about previously, even just regular dice rolling. It is the actual checking against a stat and having a target to hit specifically that is measured against your own stats or the monster stats. That is exciting. It provides that moment of euphoria, and it is more exciting to me than critical hits and failures, just dice rolling, because it is a targeted thing that you can exceed, and it's going to happen more often. And it provides the foundational building blocks, I think, more than those other previous dice rolling mechanics, which we talked about. 3 more! I feel like these are only going to get longer as I get more excited about the mechanics. But number 73 is Targeted Clues. And targeted clues are specifically that you are giving clues that you want some players to guess, but not all players to guess. So if you've played Decrypto or if you have played Dixit, these are those are the 2 highest ranked on Board Game Geek currently. But if you have played either of those games, for Decrypto, you're on team, so you want your team to get the right answer, but you don't want the other team to figure out what the right answer was. So you need to make it just vague enough so that the other team can't guess and your team can guess because they have a tiny bit more information than the other team. Or in Dixit, the whole premise of Dixit is that you're all going to play a card. The clue giver will give a phrase. They'll say, make it rain, and then they'll put a card down, and everybody else will put a card in, and then you'll shuffle those, and you will try to guess which of the cards is the actual clue givers. There'll be pictures on each card. And so you want to give a phrase that is not so obvious, because if it's super obvious, then the game no longer becomes fun. But if it's too hard, then the clue giver also doesn't get any points. So they need to have somebody get their clue, and then they both get points. But if everybody guesses, or if nobody guesses, then the clue giver doesn't get points. And I think that's why I like this as a mechanic, is because it is specifically designed to make certain games fun. It is something that is implemented to games that wouldn't work otherwise. When you think about it, the reason the targeted clues exist, in Dixit especially, is so that there is a game. It often is this foundational point that you cannot have the same game without it. Otherwise, you're just looking at pictures and saying phrases, and then there is no game because you're just describing your picture in its entirety to the room. And so the fact that somebody came up with this idea once upon a time to say, okay, no, some people need to get it, but not everybody can get it. And that immediately creates this type of conflict of interest within the players. And it's exciting. It is exciting. So that's why it is my number 73 on the best mechanics of all time. Number 72 is Simultaneous Action Selection. And again, this is fairly self-explanatory. Everybody will be choosing an action, but you'll be choosing it simultaneously. So you don't get to see what everybody else does before you choose. You have to anticipate what everybody else is going to do, and then you reveal and see if you're right. And what I do love about simultaneous action selection is I see it as a strictly competitive sort of mechanic. I think it being implemented in Mission Red Planet, or I just talked about it on Monday's crowdfunding countdown video about dodos riding dinos. Everybody having this choice, not only does it help propel the game forward, but there is this sense of, Should I risk this thing? Broom Service is another one that has simultaneous action selection in terms of, do I risk playing this better card that's going to be great for me right now, but it might get foiled by somebody else's move? There's a nice sense of tension around the table, but what's also kind of cool is how it's been implemented in cooperative games moving forward to create that sense of discommunication. It's in Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is the #1 ranked game on Board Game Geek and also the #1 ranked in this genre. It's also in Spirit Island, honestly, so that you just you just move the game along a little bit quicker. Which I appreciated as well in games which don't need everybody to see the turns, or it doesn't need to be involved in that decision space. You can use it to accelerate the speed of play. There's a lot of benefits to doing simultaneous action selection, but you also lose the chance of seeing what everybody else has done. It's very satisfying to predict what people are doing, but at the same time, you can lose that sense of really planning things out. But I like it. I like it in a game. It's not something that I necessarily, again, seek out in my games specifically, but it's not something that I will ever dislike being in a game. I can't think of a game where I thought, oh, we should not have been doing the actions simultaneously. It always feels very ingrained to the meat and potatoes of the game, and so that's why I like it. And finally, number 71, and I cannot believe it made it this far up the list, because I hate this mechanic, but I actually don't hate it. It's a love-hate relationship, and that is the Rondel mechanic. And I don't honestly hate this. I often conflate it with the Mancala mechanic, which takes place kind of on a rondel, and one that I am forever traumatized with because of playing Trajan. But the Rondel mechanic just means that there is a circle of actions and you are continually moving your character along this circle of actions. And it can be implemented in a really large variety of ways. And in fact, it's surprising to me that Great Western Trail is not listed as the #1 Rondel mechanic on Board Game Geek. It's actually currently Teotihuacan. That's the highest rated one with a rondel, but Great Western Trail is essentially a rondel. It's an ever-changing rondel that things are added to. But as I say that, I realize where I'm mistaken, because Great Western Trail has branching paths and you can take different things. Even though you're passing over the same path over and over, you can take different elements to it. And I think that would eliminate it from rondel contention. Whereas in a true rondel, it is just this circle that's going over and over again. Actually, the Red Cathedral has this yeah, it is beside me. The Red Cathedral has this in its game as well, because the resources that you can choose are all put along this rondel, and you get to move a dice the specific number of pips that is showing until you get to a specific resource, and then you can take that resource. And if you can't get to that resource, or you can't go in that specific amount of time, or it costs you too much to go further along the rondel and jump portions of the track, there's a lot of really interesting elements to it. I also don't like how constrained it sometimes makes me feel. But that's part of the love-hate aspect to it. You have to choose where to move and which spot to get to and how quickly you run around it over and over again. The other ones listed are Viscounts of the West Kingdom, Imperial, and Navigator. Those are also listed as having rondels, but I haven't played them, so I don't even know. Anyway, that's it. We have reached number 71. That's number 80 to 71. I'm going to wrap the video up because it's already too long. I'll try to make the other ones shorter. No, I won't, because I like talking to you, and I hope you're enjoying this series as well. If you are, definitely hit the like button, because my analytics on YouTube for this series are not good, but I still want to do them, and I kind of want to keep doing them and maybe push through and not take as many breaks, because I like talking about them. I like refreshing my memory about mechanics, and I like breaking things down in this way. So yeah, let me know which of this batch is your favorite, and anything else you care to chime in on. I always like hearing from you. Thanks for watching. My name's Chris George. I don't have a catchphrase, and I still don't have an understanding on what the damn hell a rondel is. What the rondel? See you in the next one.